In the heart of Kandarin, a region defined by trade and dynasty, there exists a place where none of that applies. A place where the soil has not known peace in living memory, where the dead are not counted, where neither side advances and neither retreats. History tends to record its wars in clean strokes: a cause, a campaign, a resolution. The Khazard Gnome War offers none of these certainties. It has no confirmed beginning. It has produced no treaty. It has no end in sight. What follows is an attempt, drawn from what records survive, what testimony remains, and what reason can still impose upon the evidence, to understand how this war came to be, how it has been sustained, and what, if anything, it was ever meant to achieve. To understand this conflict, one must first understand what existed before it, and what, in large measure, still endures in spite of it. The Gnome Empire is among the oldest continuous civilization in Kandarin. Founded during the First Age, it survived the devastation of the God Wars, barely, and re-emerged in the Fourth Age as a society reconstituted from memory and necessity.
What we know for sure is that at its height, the Gnome Empire extended across much of what is now Kandarin. It commanded sophisticated infrastructure, a functioning monarchy, and most distinctively, a network of what we call spirit trees. A sort of sentient flora that served as transport hubs, communication channels, and cultural anchors for the gnomes.
These spirit trees were not merely logistical assets. They were, in a meaningful sense, the identity of the gnome civilization. To move through them was to move through the empire itself. By the early 5th Age, the empire had scaled back considerably. Human settlement had encroached across territories that the gnomes once commanded without challenge. One of the most infamous battles was labelled the Battle of atrocities, which was a decisive victory over the goblin forces, and this victory had briefly seemed to guarantee gnomish dominance in the region.
The Battle of atrocities was really quite interesting. The gnomes were clearly outgunned against the goblin forces, so had to resort to a sort of smoke and mirror assault. The gnome king at the time, King Helthrog, and his advisor Glofri devised a plan using optics and light magic. They conjured an illusion of several giant tortoises, an animal which goblins were deathly afraid of, and so upon seeing these illusions, the goblin forces fled in fear.
However, this is now a distant triumph, its momentum long dissipated. The gnomes had retreated largely to two principal settlements, the Tree Gnome Stronghold to the northwest of Ardoin, and the Tree Gnome Village to the south. Despite the split, the empire remained functional. It retained its monarchies, its military capabilities, and its spirit tree network. It was not a dying civilization, although its numbers were reduced. And then, from the southwest came General Khazard. General Khazard is not what he appears to be. To the population of the surrounding region, he is understood as a dark spirit, a ruthless commander returned from the dead. It is an identity he has not discouraged. Whether by design or by indifference, the myth has served him well. But in reality, it's far more complicated, and in some respects, more alarming. You see, Khazard is a Majorat.
The Majorat, truly one of the scarier forces through Gillenorian history. They were and still are a race of powerful, long-lived beings, thought to be almost immortal, who arrived at Gillenor in the Second Age and have shaped its history, often catastrophically, ever since.
He is, by Majorat reckoning, young, born on Gillenor itself during the late Third Age, during the height of the God Wars. His mother, Palkira, died shortly after his birth. His tutelage fell to her ally, the Majorat Hazil, a figure who himself would exert considerable influence over the region of Kandarin. During the Fourth Age, Khazard moved south through Kandarin, establishing his authority over the human settlements around what is now called Port Khazard and the Fight Arena. He organized these populations into a standing army, disciplined, loyal, and by all accounts, effective. At some point during this period, his forces came into conflict with the tree gnomes. The precise circumstances of the initial contact are not recorded. What is clear is that by the early 5th Age, that conflict had become a war, and that war had become, for reasons that remain subject to debate, permanent. No document survives that records the first engagement of the Khazard-Gnome War.
It's really quite baffling. Despite our best efforts, we've never been able to find much on the first engagement. No messenger's report, no declaration, no incident that scholars can point to and say, here, this is where it began. What is known is at some point, Khazard forces began to attack the gnomes, lethally, systemically, and without apparent intent to negotiate. The gnomes then resisted. The resistance became entrenched. The entrenchment became, eventually, what we call the battlefield.
What began this war remains one of Kandarin's enduring historical questions. But in the absence of documentation, analysis must serve, and the theories that have emerged from careful study of the available evidence do not agree with one another. We will examine 4 of them in turn. The most straightforward explanation for the war is territorial.
By the early 5th Age, Khazard had established a significant power base in southwestern Kandarin. His forces were organized, equipped, and crucially, he had the tacit approval of King Lathis of Ardoin, who permitted the Khazard army to operate within Kandarin's borders, and had at least on one occasion employed them for peacekeeping purposes. Under this reading, the war is simply the next logical step in an expanding military operation. The Tree Gnome village lay along strategically important ground in central Kandarin. Khazard moved to secure it. The gnomes refused to yield. Violence followed. For this theory has the virtue of simplicity. It has the considerable drawback of failing to account for the war's character. A campaign of territorial conquest, as a rule, ends either in victory or in defeat. But we can see that the Khazard Gnome War has done neither. It has persisted as a steady, grinding intensity for decades.
Territorial expansion does not explain a war of attrition, so perhaps something else may be at work. A second line of analysis focuses not on territory, but on infrastructure.
The gnomish spirit tree network was and remains the central axis of gnome civilization. It permits rapid movement across great distances, enables communication between settlements, and represents a form of collective identity that is difficult to replicate or replace. Disrupting that network would not simply weaken the gnomes' military, it would fracture the institutional coherence of the empire itself. Evidence for this theory comes in part from the documented pattern of Khazard's operations. Rather than pushing steadily towards the village, his forces have repeatedly targeted the orbs of protection, objects of direct strategic value to the village's ability to maintain the spirit tree. The theft of these orbs and the subsequent siege of the village itself suggests an operational logic towards erasure.
If this interpretation is correct, the battlefield may be less the focus of the war than a sustained diversion, something designed to exhaust and distract while the real objectives are pursued elsewhere. The third theory is the most difficult to assess, and the most unsettling in its implications. General Khazard is not human. He does not think on human timescale. His motivations, whatever they may be, are not necessarily legible through the frameworks that historians apply to conventional military commanders. The Majorat as a species have operated on Gillinor with objectives that have frequently proved to be deeper, longer term, and more strategic than they initially appeared.
Khazard's mentor and fellow Majorat Haziel dominated this region of Kandarin for the better part of an age before being expelled. It is not unreasonable to ask whether Khazard's campaign against the gnomes is, in some sense, part of a broader Majorat interest in the region, one that may have nothing to do with the gnomes themselves.
Whatever that interest might be, the evidence does not permit us to say. The theory is compelling precisely because it explains the war's gridlock, a conflict prosecuted for reasons its commander has not disclosed, toward ends its adversary cannot comprehend, and may never reach a conclusion its adversary would recognize as one. This possibility should not be dismissed, nor should it be stated as fact. Whatever its cause, the war found its expression at a stretch of contested ground in northern Kandarin, known as the battlefield.
The battlefield is not a site of decisive engagement, in fact, quite the opposite. It's a site of continuous engagement, a front that has persisted for decades with no strategic resolution. Both sides take casualties, neither side consolidates gains. The fighting continues because, well, it just does.
This pattern, grinding, expensive, inconclusive, is characteristic of a war in which neither party can achieve outright victory, but neither is willing or perhaps able to accept defeat.
Military historians have a term for this kind of conflict. It's not a war to be won, it's a war to be survived.
For the Gnomes, survival has required constant adaptation. The deployment of gliders for aerial reconnaissance and rapid movement, the use of ballistic catapults for defensive fire, the careful management of the spirit tree network to preserve the village's ability to reinforce and resupply. For Khazard's forces, the war has offered a different kind of logic, one of sustained pressure, incremental erosion, and the patient exploitation of any weakness the Gnomes expose. And that weakness, when it came, would come from the Gnome village itself. The Tree Gnome village is protected by 3 objects known as the Orbs of Protection. Their precise function is securing the village's defences, and by extension, its spirit tree. It has been described in Gnomish records, though the specific mechanisms remain obscure to outside study, though what is not obscure is the consequence of their absence. At an unspecified point in the war's history, the Gnome forces at the battlefield found themselves in sufficiently desperate circumstances to make a decision that would prove catastrophic.
The Gnomes transferred one of the Orbs of Protection to the battlefield, presumably to shore up the deteriorating position there. The logic was sound in isolation, but the consequences were not. With one orb absent and the village's defences therefore compromised, a detachment of Khazard's forces, having located a route through the maze, entered the village. King Borin's wife was killed. Many other gnomes, civilian gnomes, were killed alongside her. The remaining 2 orbs were stolen.
The strategic objective appears to have been the spirit tree itself, the irreplaceable core of the village's identity and functionality. With the orbs gone and the defences broken, the tree would be exposed.
The spirit tree was a source of immense power for the gnomes. Without it, I just don't know how long they would have survived.
But a conflict of this duration inevitably produces innovation. Both sides have adapted to the specific conditions of this theatre, its terrain, its distance from external support, its balance of offensive and defensive imperatives.
The gnomes are not by nature or by history a militaristic people. Their civilization is defined by craft, by design, and a relationship with the natural world that expresses itself most clearly in their spirit tree network and their elaborate architectural ingenuity.
In warfare, these qualities translate into something unexpected: technical adaptability. Like we've seen with their gliders and their ballistas, inventions that have become emblematic of the gnomish military approach. These spirit trees themselves functioning as a form of strategic mobility, allowing the gnomish forces to shift personnel and material across significant distances in ways that Khazard's infantry-based force cannot readily intercept or replicate. Gnomish warfare is the warfare of a people who did not choose this conflict and have not resigned themselves to it. Every innovation ambition is an act of persistence. Khazard's army is a different kind of force entirely. It is structured, hierarchical, and orientated towards overwhelming ground pressure. Infantry units push across open terrain in organized formations, a clear command hierarchy from General Khazard himself through commanders, captains, and warlords down to common soldiers ensures that orders translate efficiently into action.
What the Khazard army lacks in technical ingenuity, it compensates for in institutional resilience. The human populations of Port Khazard and the surrounding region have been integrated into the military structure over generations. This is not a mercenary force, it is a standing army with deep roots in the territory it controls, and crucially, with a commander who does not age, does not tire, and does not reconsider.
One side fights to preserve a civilization, the other fights to dismantle one, whatever the original cause. This much is visible in the method. The village compromised, the orbs stolen, the battlefield still grinding, came a figure whose place in the historical record is as ambiguous as everything else about this war.
The accounts that survive describe an outsider, a traveller who had recently navigated the village's maze. Whether through skilled curiosity or accident, the sources do not agree. King Baldurin, with few alternatives, appealed to this individual for assistance. We don't know much about this character, however, they have been referred to among scholars as the adventurer, or sometimes the player.
What followed, according to these accounts, was remarkable.
The adventurer located the stronghold in which the first stolen orb was being held, penetrated its defences, employing the gnome ballista to breach the outer walls, and recovering the orb, returning it to the village.
Upon learning about 2 additional stolen orbs, the individual, known to some as the player, then pursued the Khazard Warlord.
The Warlord was hidden in the outskirts west of Ardoin, beyond the immediate conflict. However, it didn't take the adventurer long to find them, and as the record describes it, a great confrontation followed. The Warlord was defeated, the remaining orbs were recovered, the village's defences were restored, and the spirit tree was spared.
The identity of this individual is not established in the surviving record. Whether he was a professional soldier, an opportunist, a diplomat, or something else entirely, the accounts do not say. Several historians have questioned whether a single figure in history was responsible for both recoveries, or whether the accounts have compressed a more complex set of events into a single narrative.
Whether this figure truly existed as described, or whether the events attributed to them reflect a more disturbed effort obscured by time and incomplete record-keeping, remains uncertain.
So, do you believe the adventure is real?
Well, I certainly hope so, although it is daunting to think of one person wielding so much power.
The recovery of the orbs and the Khazard warlord's defeat did not end the war. Contemporary reports from the battlefield indicate that hostilities continued without interruption following these events. Neither Khazard's forces or the Gnomish army stood down. No negotiation was initiated. The war, in this respect, behaves as it has always behaved, as though none of what happens within it is capable of concluding it. This quality, the war's apparent immunity to resolution, may be its most distinctive characteristic, and it returns us inevitably to the question of purpose. A war that cannot be concluded by conventional means, by victory, by defeat, by negotiation, is a war that perhaps never meant to be concluded by conventional means, or a war whose conclusion is defined in terms that one party has not chosen to make visible. General Khazard has not explained himself. He is not known to have offered terms. He has not sought peace. And the gnomes have not surrendered. They have not retreated. They continue to fight and to survive, and to maintain the village and its spirit tree against a pressure that shows no sign of stopping. It would be a mistake to view the Khazard-Gnome War in isolation. The Gnome Empire, even in its reduced 5th Age form, is engaged in more than one conflict.
Running concurrently with the war against Khazard is a sustained, if not largely covert campaign being waged against the gnomes by the Hidden City of Apasandra. Founded by the exiled mage Glofri, Apasandra has deployed espionage assets with both of the Empire's principal settlements, conducted experiments with potentially destabilizing consequences for the surrounding environment, and maintained diplomatic contact with actors hostile to the gnomish mainstream.
The gnomes, in other words, are fighting on at least two fronts simultaneously, one visible and violent at the battlefield, one invisible and insidious from within.
Whether these conflicts are coordinated, whether there is communication between Apasandra and Khazard's forces, or between Khazard and any of Apasandra's external allies, is not established by the available evidence. The question has, however, been raised by analysts who consider the coincidence of these pressures on the Gnome Empire difficult to attribute to chance.
The Empire endures, but it endures under conditions that would test any civilization's resources, cohesion, and resolve. Historians have a professional obligation to resist the temptation of false resolution. Not every question has an answer. Not every conflict has a lesson that can be cleanly extracted from its violence and presented as the justification for the suffering it caused. The Khazard Gnome War is, by any honest account, one of the most poorly understood conflicts in the recorded history of Kandarin, in the recorded history of Gielinor. Its cause is unknown. Its strategic logic is obscure. Its cost among the gnomish population has been severe. Civilian deaths, the destruction of cultural infrastructure, the sustained erosion of a civilization that was already reduced from what it had once been. And yet the gnomes endure. The spirit tree stands. King Bolrin continues to govern. The battlefield continues its ceaseless, inconclusive exchange. General Khazard, for his part, has not commented on any of this. He operates on timescales that make human questions feel, perhaps, like temporary disturbances. In an atmosphere he has already outlasted. No peace was ever agreed. No victory was ever secured. And in Kandarin, in the churned ground between the forests of gnomes and the marching columns of the Khazard army, the war continues. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, leave a like, and a big thanks to my awesome wife who did some of the voice acting here. I hope to see you all next week in another video. Okay, goodbye.